Before starting with the formality of the speech, I want to tell you something that came to my mind while I was seeing the wonderful ministers that I have.
Antes de arrancar con la formalidad del discurso, quiero contarles algo que me surgió mientras que veía exponer a los maravillosos ministros que tengo.
And to whom I am so grateful for being the best government in the history of Argentina.
Tanto le estoy agradecido por estar haciendo el mejor gobierno de la historia argentina.
And what came to my mind, I don't know if someone saw it at some point, there was a television program called The Masked Magician.
Y lo que se me vino a la cabeza, no sé, digamos, si alguien lo llegó a ver en algún momento, había un programa de televisión que se llamaba El Mago Enmascarado.
And what was interesting about the program was that a masked magician appeared, and what he did was share the tricks of the other magicians.
Ese programa era que aparecía un mago enmascarado y lo que hacía era mostrar los trucos de los otros magos.
And why do I relate it with what we have just seen, with the privilege that they have had today to be able to see 5 of my ministers sharing?
Con lo que acabamos de ver, con el privilegio que han tenido hoy de poder ver a 5 de mis ministros.
It is the luxury that I give myself at every cabinet meeting, and that what today the world calls the Argentine miracle. Today they saw the trick. A trick is a group of formidable professionals.
Llama el milagro argentino. Hoy vieron el truco. El truco es un conjunto de profesionales formidables, maravillosos.
Thus, in addition to being talented, they are also good people, and that they are the great architects of making Argentina great again. Thank you very much to each of my ministers, because thanks to you we are taking Argentina out of the well and we are going to make it great again. So, giving thanks to these wonderful, in fact, I was not showing, but it is also another crack that is there, that is Dr. Demi Mriedel, who was going to execute the Argentine nuclear plan.
Dándole las gracias a estos maravillosos. Es más, no estuvo exponiendo, pero también es otro crack que anda ahí, que es el Dr. Demian Reidel, digamos, quien va a ejecutar el plan nuclear argentino.
Thank you, Mario. Thank you, Federico. Thank you, Toto. Thank you, Martin. Thank you, Boss. Thank you, Sebastian. Thank you, Patricia. Thank you, Mariano. Thank you, teacher. Thank you, Manuel. And thank you to all who are here.
Gracias, Patricia. Gracias, Mariano. Gracias, profe. Gracias, Manuel. Y gracias a todos los que están.
Because it is always nice to be among so many friends and brothers in arms, especially in the hall of the great battle that is approaching in the Beneran territory.
Es agradable estar entre tantos amigos y hermanos de armas. Sobre todo en la antesala de la gran batalla que se aproxima en territorio bonaerense.
I want to start by thanking the ministers of my cabinet for the extraordinary work they are doing in the national government, and for putting their knowledge and experience at the disposal of the party to expose our model to the provinces. Also to Sebastian Perger for organizing this congress and coordinating our efforts in the province of Buenos Aires. And obviously to my friend the Professor Perth for being our spearhead in this unjustly punished province by the decades of Dosidius, and that today goes to a terrible present under the mandate of the Stolans de Axel Kicillof.
Y obviamente a mi amigo el Profe Perth por ser nuestra punta de lanza en esta provincia injustamente castigada por las décadas de desidias y que hoy atraviesa un pésimo presente bajo el mandato del pichón de Stalin, Axel Kicillof.
And obviously you already know the last thank you, which is for the boss, for Karina Milei.
El último agradecimiento, que es para el jefe, para Karina Milei.
Who took on the titanic task of organizing the National Party from scratch in less than 2 years, who gave us enormous joy next to Dorney in the federal capital just a month ago.
Quien se cargó la titánica tarea de organizar el Partido Nacional desde cero en menos de 2 años. Que nos dio una alegría enorme junto a Dorney en Capital Federal hace tan solo un mes.
It is almost as if the effect dominated. Thank you, Manuel, thank you. You know what my voice should be.
Casi como el efecto dominó. Gracias, Manuel. Gracias. Saben lo que debe ser mi vocero.
The good part is that the action of Manuelson leaves him calmer than turtle, that is, a wine comely.
La parte buena es que, digamos, el accionar prolijo de Manuel lo deja más tranquilo a Toto, o sea, puedo putear tranquilo.
So I say thank you to all of you for the enormous work you are doing,
Digamos, por el trabajo enorme que están haciendo.
and above all,
Sobre
after
todo,
some
después de
ruffles of
algunos
politics
marretas de
and
la
journalism
política
that give the luxury of underestimating both the boss and this wonderful government team.
todo, digamos, a este equipo de gobierno maravilloso.
Damn fuck around. I only determine the direction. They're the architects. They are the ones who are making great Argentina.
Yo solamente determino el rumbo. Ellos son los arquitectos. Ellos son los que están haciendo grandes.
A great playwright wrote that we should not be afraid of greatness, that some are born great, some reach greatness, and others are simply imposed by greatness. But the truth is that there are many paths to it.
Que no hay que temerle miedo a la grandeza. Que algunos nacen grandes, algunos alcanzan la grandeza y a otros la grandeza simplemente se les impone. Pero lo cierto es que hay muchos caminos hacia ella.
Argentina was born great, leading the liberating efforts of the region, then established it during decades of civil and conductive wars. Then it reached greatness again, thanks to the civilizational gesture of the 1980s generation, and many years later the political caste dilapidated the fruits of that work to enrich themselves and to build an omnipresent state that unfortunately brought us here.
Para montar un estado omnipresente que lamentablemente nos trajo hacia acá.
That is, to enlarge the state makes us poorer. As Federico said, the present state is the aberration, because someone has to pay for it.
El estado presente es el ajuste, porque alguien lo tiene que pagar.
So either we pay them with taxes, that is, they take away our income, or we pay them with implicit hidden taxes, such as inflation, or repay them with future taxes, which is debt and is to pass the burden from the present generation to our children, to our grandchildren, and to the other generations.
Digamos, la fiesta presente a nuestros hijos, a nuestros nietos y a las demás generaciones.
So what I'm trying to say is that history is full of bifurcations, of moments of change and, consequently, of opportunities to be written, opportunities to reach greatness or to lose the greatness achieved by others.
Oportunidades para alcanzar grandeza o para perder la grandeza alcanzada por otros.
That is why the great challenge to turn our plans into reality is to know how to interpret the spirit of the time, to know how to be in tune with history. Machiavelli used to say, fortune varies, and men, seven in their way of proceeding, prosper while harmonizing with it, and fail when they diverge. Today is the moment of freedom, and we are in tune with freedom to make Argentina great again. That is today the bells of history ring again, and fortune presents another opportunity for Argentina.
Las campanas de la historia vuelven a sonar y la fortuna le presenta otra oportunidad a la Argentina.
In 2023, history imposed a clear mandate on us. For the first time in 100 years, the Argentines decided to undertake a profound change. They decided to change in a drastic and definitive way an economic model that had already run out, and they also chose to end once and forever with the caste system that had dominated politics, where the politicians hung from the head of a grotesque state where bureaucrats came first and working Argentines were citizens second. They did not choose a partial and temporary change, but a permanent one. Not a change of names, but a change of model. But the reins of the national government are only a first resource to drive this change, because a good part of the aspects of the model that some kiss like an anchor in the subnational levels of the government, especially in the provinces and mainly in this province where 17 million people live. The only way to complete the change that people entrusted us with is by changing not only the national government, but also what happens in the provinces and in the municipalities. That is why today, a year and a half after their disaster, we have another historic battle ahead, where the future of millions of Argentines are at stake again and where, once again, we must be at the top of the circumstances. Today we have the task of taking the model of freedom to the province of Buenos Aires, where the caste have been governing for almost 4 decades, almost without interruptions, and where society demands a change. And with all the reason in the world, because the reality of the Pinellas policy is like traveling in time to a mass government. The festival of privileges, absurd programs, and luxurious political spending that the national government had until 2023. Now they hide it in the province. But what they cannot hide is the sad contrast with the abandonment and misery that people live with. So that we understand the current state of the province of Buenos Aires. Today, in the hands of the former Prime Minister of the Kirchnerism, we go to what really matters, the data. Because as we say, even before entering politics, there is a kill story. Education. Today in the province of Buenos Aires, only 46% of students reach the 6th grade in the expected time and with satisfactory knowledge in language and mathematics. And Tati tried to disguise the educational failure. They eliminated the repetition, a measure that aids the Kirchnerism of the whole body. They made us go from being an educational lighthouse for the whole continent to the last positions in the region, by force of applying ideological and demonstrably forced policies. And today, from so much to level down, they left the educational boy in the subsoil. Infrastructure. On the other hand, according to the latest census, 23% of the population of the homes have no connection to drinking water. Only 60% have toilets and only 65% have network gas. This is the legacy of the lovers of public works. When corruption is so endemic and infinite money is thrown at it, it is resolved because it is a barrel without a bottom. Then they have the toupee of running away with the fact that we do not see the work. I say 7, almost 40 years. They were charged taxes to do all kinds of work and they were not given anything. They will shit on top of a pole. Insecurity and injustice. Insecurity, decades of sick jurisprudence that treats the criminal as a victim of society and defends the true victim, have left the results the devastation we see. In the year 2024, Matanza had twice as many homicides per capita as the national rate. Almost 1 in every 5 homicides in the province occur in Matanza, a historic fortress of Peronism. And to think that there is a tough guy who comes out to say that Matanza, he was describing it, is the accomplice of the Iranians. Yes, he shared Matanza as if he were Swiss. It was an incredible thing. I say truly, I'm not surprised. And this is just one case. The rest of the urban community is not much better. To the surprise of no one, the government in the province of Buenos Aires did not adhere to the law of reiteration, and the deputies of provincial officialism voted against the projects of the juvenile penal reform, despite the fact that almost 24,000 crimes were committed by minors in the province during 2023. That is more than half of the total in the country. The size of the state, that is, the expense. In financial terms, the province is a disaster. Only in the last quarter of last year, they increased their debt by 12.2%. Translated into pesos is an increase of 1.3 billion pesos. This is impressive because they are tremendously rough, but they are rough. That is, they live off the debt, but they are lovers of the tax deficit. And when the debt is the daughter of the tax deficit, that is, the cognitive dissonance is tremendous. That is, they do not understand cause and effect. In fact, they have been accusing us of being a debt government. And we are the only government that, since the return of democracy, that has lowered the debt by $40 billion. It is truly disheartening. So, on the one hand, this data is horrible because to increase that quarter to quarter in 1 year would increase its debt by almost 60%. That is, can you imagine? It is as if we, at the national level, increased the debt by $500 billion. We put $300 billion more. What I have said is all the debt that the Kirchnerism took on since it has been in the government. But on the other hand, given its deficit of 1.5 billion pesos, the amortizations for the advance of the previous debt equivalent to 0.9 billion, and the financial investment equivalent to 28 million more. What is more, the needs of financing, then today they are equivalent to 2.5 billion pesos. In other words, they have a lack of control over the numbers. But what do they want? If the Soviet adds with difficulty, they can't even add with an abacus. What's more, if I run a little, I think it even has difficulties to make a zero with a glass. What's more, one would wonder how these 2.5 billion can be put together. Well, it only has two options. Either they fix people with even more taxes, or they pay even more debt, which is nothing but future taxes, which is the only thing that comes to mind. That is, this idiot never thought about lowering public spending ever. Now, this one doesn't have the monopoly of the stupidity. Be careful. We had another idiot who was nicknamed the passerby, who is, I don't know if you remember that guy, Martin Guzman. Well, it's very interesting, accomplice of the genocidal government of Alberto Fernandez and the confinement of the Argentinians. And if we do all the math Argentina had done during the pandemic, things like a mediocre country, instead of having 130,000 dead, we would have had 30,000. Therefore, they committed a genocide of 100,000 people. It is unimaginable that they remain silent when they continued to lock people up, because they were convenient in the polls. One day they were in a report on Antonio Leigh's program, It is Admissible. He grabs Antonio Leigh and says, well, there is a tax deficit. I say, we have tried everything, why don't we try once? With the public spending, why don't we try to cut the public spending? And the guy says, no, cut the spending, no. That is, this is interesting. I had to suffer being a national deputy for the autonomous city of Buenos Aires. When they sent me the budget and he said, supposedly, they lowered the tax deficit, something that they never achieved either. But apart from that, the numbers they showed, there was an improvement in the tax result. And the interesting thing is that that would happen with an increase in the public spending in real terms. And he said, no, there is no adjustment here. No, of course, there is no cutting the public spending. That is, they were breaking the ass of the private sector in a homicidal way. And the guy said, lease of body, because this is very interesting. Because it goes in line with what Fireker said, with what Torta said. That is, these guys, the only thing they care about is stealing. So, for them, adjustment had to do with whether they touched or not the public spending. But that no, there was no adjustment because the public spending rose. It made the private sector bleed, which is the one that generates wealth. Today, Argentina is a novelty in the world. I have to say, El Toto has been elected the best Minister of Economy in the world. Federico has become a consultant member of the International Monetary Fund.
Federico se ha convertido hasta, digamos,
and of other countries in everything that has to do with deregulation. In fact, in the middle of all this adjustment, the International Monetary Fund's own team called Patricia to say how they made such an adjustment and maintained social order. And the most interesting thing is that in the Argentine case, this unthinkable result is highlighted, which is the expansion adjustment. That is, we adjusted 15 points of the GDP, 5 in the nation, in the treasury, 10 in the central bank.
10 en el Banco Central.
And when they predicted a cataclysm that we were going to sink into a Great Depression, apart from the fact that they said that we were not going to end inflation, something that we are annihilating. What is the interesting thing? In the first quarter, the GDP grew by 6%. In the first quarter, it is also doing it by 6%. In this second quarter, it is doing 8%. And in addition, the government of the heartless liberal lowered poverty by 10 million people. In other words, a true miracle. But you know the trick. The trick is all these people so talented. Well, as you can see, let's say I left there, with which I have to return to the criticism of the province of Buenos Aires. I mean, this of the 2.5 billion and how we finance it. It is assumed that I have the papers, but not to do this, that it is stronger than me. So now what I am going to do is try to translate into Spanish what I was telling you about the numbers of Buenos Aires. That is, the same ones who cried to the media about the alleged debt of the national government are taking the province to the brink of fiscal disaster. Everything to create a state that, trying to dedicate itself to everything, end up not fulfilling its most basic obligations. They are not confused. The only way to fix their state is by cutting public spending. But all the above should not surprise a governor here. In addition to having a Soviet vision, has decided to base his strategy on the blind opposition to our government. This is described to perfection by Federico a while ago. If we eliminate a tax, he duplicates another in the province. If we close a public office, he creates two, where all the profits plus others so many for the doubts. For example, in 2024, the province of Buenos Aires added 20,000 public employees, while we, since we took over, eliminate 50,000. One of those people we removed was reabsorbed and protected by Kicillof, and is the one who went to throw shit in the professor's house. That we detected thanks to the work of Dr. Bioch and her team. That is, while we pass the chainsaw, he spends where he does not have. All this summarized in stupidity of Kicillof to declare, from a frankly childish position, that more state is always better. Nothing good can come from someone with such limited reasoning. And what has been, in summary, the result of decades uninterrupted growth of the state, not only a state in ruins, but also spiral decadent of misery. To persist in this direction, in a few years the province of Buenos Aires will become a giant misery village, as some of its localities are already. A land of poverty, violence and illiteracy. Paradoxically, the model of the omnipresent state returns large parts of the province and its inhabitants to a state of nature, where there is no rule of law, there are no contracts that are worth anything, and too many people condemned to poor, brittle and brief existences. And this is not that the plan went wrong. This has not been a mistake or an accident. As someone said, the purpose of a system is what it does. That is to say, a system is judged by its results, not by the intentions of its creators. Milton Friedman said, no matter how noble they proclaim themselves. Although I doubt that the intentions of these people have exceeded the search for emerald, power and wealth. That is to say, do you not be wrong. These people, visual born, the only thing they care about is power. And people are only functional so that they retain power. They do not care about the good Argentine people. The only thing they care about is to perpetuate themselves in the state, to live with power and to starve and parasitizing us. The ultimate consequence of this recipe is that it destroyed the country in the last 100 years. In economic matters, they are leading to the logical conclusion, to the impossible tax pressure. That is why no one wants to invest or generate employment. I was just mentioning it, where the number of companies has been static in Argentina since 2008. The number of jobs has been static since 2011. That is to say, the present state has been a machine to destroy wealth. That is why Argentina, since it began to embrace socialist ideas, there at the beginning of the 20th century, was one of the richest countries in the world. When we arrived, we were 120th in GDP per capita, and it would have been worse if we had not been able to avoid the mega crisis that we faced. This is quite complicated, because sometimes it is very difficult to evaluate something that seems counterfactual. When we came to the government, and we had the monetary imbalance, which was twice what we had in the previous one of Rodriguez, which occurred in 1975. It implied multiplying the inflation rate by 6. That means that at least the inflation that we acquire, we would have multiplied it by 12 times. But not only that, they made the central bank worse. And in the previous crisis of the hyperinflation of our funds in 1989, that year the wholesale inflation reached 5,000%. That is to say, we had 4 monetary bases, beating one day. Thus in one day we could multiply the amount of money. Imagine what would have been a situation where all the same goods but 5 times more money, and also falling demand for money. Not only that, another very important fact. We had debts in pesos, equivalent to 9 monetary bases. It was an incredible tsunami of pesos. That is why only history will be able to do justice to the enormous task of Tercio Capito, of Santi Borsali, of Pablo Canner, of Kieverman, and all that wonderful team that not only prevented us from hyperinflation, and they are defeating inflation, but they also did it without fixing the type of exchange rate, without controlling price controls, without expropriations, and also readapting rates. And that which seemed an impossible task has become the best stabilization plan in the history of the Argentine Republic, even much better than the convertibility program of Carlos Saúl Menem, and even more so Menem's government, which according to a work by Gerardo La Pola, Basel Ergoin called passing the buck, was the best government in Argentina. Basically consisted of the convertibility plan and a set of structural reforms. Our stabilization plan today is better than that of convertibility. The wholesale inflation traveled 54% when we assumed office, which annualized is 17,000%. And the last month the wholesale inflation was negative at 0.3. That is to say, like the matota. But not only there. By the hand of the whole team, and especially by Federico Stroessner, the structural reforms that we have made for a year and a half of government are 25 times bigger than those made by Menem's government. We have made the biggest structural reforms in the last 100 years altogether. Therefore, have no doubt we defend this model, because we are the best government in the history of Argentina. That is to say, with these results, we are going to be able to dye Argentina purple. The Argentines are going to dye Argentina purple.
No puede ser que no vayamos a poder teñir de violeta la Argentina. Los argentinos vamos a teñir de violeta la
And of
Argentina.
course, we are going to be able to do that because we are going to be able to tee that. And on the other
Y
hand,
del otro lado,
there is this impoverishing model
este modelo
of the
empobrecedor de los
Kirchnerista,
kirchneristas.
and in that it was impossible
Digamos, y en eso es que
for
fue
someone to want to
imposible
invest,
que alguien quiera invertir,
for someone
que
to
alguien
generate
genere
employment.
empleo.
And that is why
Por eso
every day
todos
a
los
new
días una
company
empresa nueva fuga su
flees its
domicilio
tax
fiscal
from the
desde su
Conobono to the
lugar a la
capital.
capital.
This is very
Esto es muy
interesting.
interesante, el trabajo
The
que
enormous
realmente
work
está
that
haciendo
Diego
el gobierno
Valenzuela
nacional.
is doing. In economics, there is something called voting with your feet. It's about a work by Hungarian economist called Tabu. And what is Diego doing? What Diego is doing is driving down rates and getting more competitive with respect to the other municipalities. So we are joining the battle from the nation. We are taking the battle to some municipalities. Imagine what we are going to do if the whole country is painted in violet. On the other hand, in terms of security, the guarantee has turned the Conabana into a hell where the criminals, hunted who are wealthy honest, lies behind bars. We have come to bring order to this madness, and locked up the government, and free the Argentinians. In terms of public culture, East the State is a refuge to support the army of leaders and kitchers militants that proceeded from the national state. The most extravagant example was manifested this week when it was known that who vandalized a house of Prosperot. In the end, it was an official of the Kisilov government. His position was eliminated, but he is also an official of the civilization and promotion of rights in the ministry. As the vulnerable women, well, it seems that he does not recognize the most basic right of all, which is the right to property. If it were just that. I thought of saying something, but it is that mayor. Let's continue, let's continue. No, no. Let's continue. Let's continue. No, now. Let's continue with the speech. They are donkeys without the attribute. Kisilov is the nape donkey. But going back to the issue of the official, yes, we are talking about a public official of an area of the state that should not exist, to which all the Bainhurans pay the salary, dedicating themselves to vandalizing with postal order of a deputy in claim of the freedom of a convicted. It is totally lethargical. I mean, say something else than Lucy. In the sky with diamonds. I mean, it's crazy. I mean, Lennon and McCartney were very short in Sgt. Pepper. But going back to the point, they know better than anyone that they crushed the province into the most abject subdevelopment. That's why they folded the election, so that fewer people could vote, and end up imposing a poll tax. And that's why it's so important to bring to the entire province the message that you have to vote. I mean, we have to vote. Because they do it for this. First, because they are afraid of us. Exactly. So that people don't vote. And then the weight of the rent vote is bigger and they have more chances to win. They voted in the province to continue living from politics. Look at what they want to do now with the undefined re-election of legislators and bonus intendants. But of course, for that, people have to keep going run. That is a zero-sum game. The state is better to maintain the extravagances of the cost, less for the people who finance it with taxes. I mean, we were a feedback, both to what Federico said and what Tudor said. I mean, we are referring to the restriction of the budget. And in the end, given the resources, if the state stays longer, we stay longer. That's the logic. And it's true. ties to zero-sum game, but only in the short term. In the medium and long time, it's a game of negative sum. And do you want me to give you a good example of that? Argentina, being a country that was the richest country in the world at the end of the 19th century, look at what these impresentables leftists did. In other words, the presence of the state not only steals the income and the fruit of people's work, but also, in the long term, makes us poorer. That's why they want to turn the province of Buenos Aires into an island where all the reforms we are doing never arrive, and that people continue to live in fear. And the only way to stop it is by voting. The province of Buenos Aires is the last bastion of this miserable and unhappy creed that has been the model of the omnipresent state in Argentina, a promise of equality that made us all slaves, dispossessed. Kicillof is the last hour of misery, the era of a model condemned to failure that destroyed everything it touched. It is hiding in its Kremlin, which is a provincial government, a tiny monarch that deprives people of freedom for fear that they gain autonomy. This, let's say, is also interesting, because when one looks at the models of the left that look for equality, Friedman's at that. Those governments that pursue freedom above equality get both things, while those that put equality above freedom do not get either of both things. There are several explanations in terms of incentives. There are many explanations why and social justice is unjust, why the present situation ruins our lives. But let's say a way of attacking them directly, because this is also key in the cultural battle. As Toto pointed out, we have 3 lines of action. We have management, and in such year, the best government in history, 1 year and a half, we have the political path. This is part, other political path, because to do these things, we need to win elections and to be able to change things from Congress. And the cultural battle, one of the things that clearly one sees in these depraved people of equality is this idea that they all want to be equal. And one usually tells them that these socialist ideas, because in the end they're all socialist, 5 different color, the only thing they do is equalize nicely, and they never say that. They don't want to equalize down. They say they want to equalize up. This I'm going to do with Hain, basic, what would be called IPB, that is suitable for our souls. I mean, I think that if I explain it well, he will be able to understand it, even Kicillof. Well, I don't know, because he has problems understanding the restrictions of the budget. Let's see if I can explain it clearly. It's a challenge, because if there is a single virtue that I self-recognize, it is that I'm a great disseminator. But let's suppose that we have a society that there is one that has, let's say, 80, and another has 20. So these depraved people of equality say, no, well, now, everyone has to be equal. The reality is that one says, well, look, the truth is that they are all going to end up having 20. They say, no, They are going to equalize up. Now what happens if they want to equalize up? Then the two would have to have 80, right? Well, but 80 and 80 is 160, and what happens? I was predicting how much? 100. That is, they're going to collide with a budget restriction. So first they are going to try to fix it by debt. And when they can no longer pay the debt, they will end up in default, in high interest rates, consequently in less investment, which, in the face of the future, we are not going to have 100, we are going to have less. When they cannot finance it with that, with what are they going to finance it? They are going to finance it with monetary emission, and when they generate inflation, they are going to generate distortions in relative prices. They are going to basically pulverize the economic calculation, and therefore, now we are not even going to be able to maintain 100. And also, as they are pulverizing the incentives, because if they want to do it through institutionalized theft, which are the taxes, and you want to get 30 from one to give it to the other, what is going to say the one who produces 80, I'm not going to work for 80 if I'm going to get 50. And when I get 50, let's say production, how much? Am I going to fall? 70. And how much? Is that balance going to end? It's going to end in 40. That is war. That is socialism is the machine of poverty, and I hope I have explained this example so that it is even suitable for Kisilofos. So, but here, what is the problem? The problem when you think about this is that there is nothing worse for a politician than a worker who realized that he does not need them, and that now is willing to do whatever it takes to get a pin. Do not be confused. The province is not like that, because the model of a caste is failed, but rather because it has succeeded, and it has been realized in all its splendor. Social decomposition, it's a necessary consequence and not an error, because it is a model that is destined to implode, which is basically what I just described. But if they propose the affection of a useless state, that destruction of the common law, and isolation in small, poor and miserable feuds, we will bring the empire of the law and economic progress. Argentina, as a country, has adopted a radical change of course and unprecedented in our history. We will not let the people of Buenos Aires look at the window while the rest of the country advances, and the province will be an anchor in the takeoff of the nation. What is this Buenos Aires election that we ever had? It is not simply a political party against another, nor a leader against another, nor is it only an ideology against another. It is much more. It is a clash of models and directions. Under the slogan Kirchner Ismail, freedom, the interpretation of our history and the destiny of our nation is determined. This is the model of caste against the model of freedom. It is the party of the state against the party of those who work and prosper with their own effort. It is this day understood as a gang for a few, fends against the state as a guarantor of life, poverty and freedom of people. It is a last century of humiliation and misery, opposed to a free and prosperous future, civilization or barbarism, freedom or servitude. All that and much more is at stake in this election. It has become clear that freedom and Francis is the only vehicle of change capable of turning this dark page of Argentine history. But as we know the enemy, we must be clear who we are. First of all, we are not simply a political party. We are not based on the failed formulas of the last century. We do not come to fill our pocket at the expense of the taxpayer. We are the expression of a time, the answer to decades of frustration for having the state beat on our necks 24 hours a day, with all the capacity and desire to progress, but tied, feet and hands by a parasitic system. We do not govern based on surveys other parties do. We say what we think and do what we say, because we cannot succeed as a party that has to go asking people where the wind blows. The three solutions have long application times and are usually unpopular in principle. We did not promise that the road would be easy. We promised that the road would be the right one. We have shown that we are willing to carry this cross, even if it costs us our own reputation. That is, and go how they put each one of these ministers in the electorate chair. That is why they are true heroes. We share that we did not come to politics to treat people as stupid as others do, and that is why we can ask them for their trust without being hit in the face. Other parties capture a state with say power and power, disguise a misdesire with social justice propaganda, and presumably solidarity, government programs, and what is worse, they take the voters to donate to this accumulation scheme, giving them with one hand half of what they get with the other. That say the old saying, that the one they distribute stays with the best part. For them, politics is to make a box. To make friends is to promise the people a little mirror of colors. For us, it is the opposite. For us, politics is a means to change the reality of the country. For example, just a few hours ago, we announced the elimination as an unworkable day because we understand that the caste cannot have privileges over the employees of the private sector who pays their salary and does not give him any holiday. This is the essence of our management. I always say that freedom moves forward. There is room for all who want to give life for the city of freedom, and no matter where they came from. Tabula rasa, as we have said so many times. On the contrary, this means that whoever wants to serve the party to make money, to be clientelism, and all the management of politics, does not deserve to be in the Advanced Freedom Party. This is the great mandate, to be a different party from all the parties that have existed in Argentina. And it is precisely because we are different that so far we have made successfully changes that were never before made in our history. That is why we have to have the highest bar, higher than any other party in our history. Our point of comparison cannot be the rest of politics, because the rest of politics is a crack that ruined the lives of generations of Argentines. Clearly, we are in the first place with the work we have started. We have a single mission, to make Argentina great again, to make the country recover that place between the powers of the world that it lost because of an interventionist, mediocre and mediocre class, to take from our history, we worked and apply it again, as was the case with the 80s generation. That is a generation of political leaders that is worth taking as an example. I'm not President's gang. That generation of great men stabilized the country and ruled for decades, sharing a set of guidelines that made us prosper. It is true that it has been more than a century, and that the context is different. But who believes that those elementary principles of change is deeply wrong? That is why those who saying that we are in experiment have not understood anything. We have seen years of socialism, of the different looting with which we have suffered, and we have been impoverished. Experiment, sexism and results are at the fall of everything. They have only been positive for politicians and their friends. Well, that's why we are sending them to prison. They are going to end up in prison. That said, it happened. Is that truly Republican? Let justice act freely. In short, we apply what we know works, the ideas of freedom that have been successful in all time and place, that have been applied, that have taken thousands of millions of people out of misery, and have made of the West the largest civilizatory feat in human history. We do not indulge in the fatal arrogance of believing that we are going to reinvent the wheel. Everything is already invented. What happened is that this is the first time in decades that the government has the courage to apply it, even if it is politically incorrect. And even if it has the entire political apparatus against it. Fortunately for us, we have the whole history of humanity on our side. We want to bring the model that we already applied at the national level to the province of Buenos Aires, so that the people of Buenos Aires can also be part of the Argentine miracle, so that they did not have to be hostages of a group of living people that, having been destroyed now from a national government, have found refuge in provincial public dependencies. If this is where all the rats ran away when the ship sank, here we must also clean up. That is the task that the Argentines have entrusted us with, and what will undoubtedly ratify the bonuses in September and October. Thank you very much. On December 10, 2023, we arrived at the national government with the idea of freedom and with the intentions of carrying out a profound and lasting change. We made a passage of Maccabees that we know by heart today. Victory in war does not depend on the number of soldiers, but on the forces that come from heaven. We knew that we were facing the political, media and economic apparatus of the state party. It was a real fight between David and Goliath. I'm going to give you a piece of information. This is what Nietzsche says. I mean, one says the fight between David and Goliath, of course, because that is what is seen in appearance, the little one against the giant. But in reality, the light of the results is clear. The big one, the giant, ended up being the one that looked small, which was Goliath, because on his side, he had God, he had Gem, he had the creator of the universe, and that's why he won. And the state is the incarnation of evil, and we are going to end all these mental parasites at the state party. Today, although the field is a little more balanced, they still have the control of a territory, the highest average in the history of the province, and they are willing to break public accounts in order to scratch only half a bank more in the legislature, as Massa did in 2023, which printed 13 points of a GDP and left us potential hyperinflation. It's interesting, isn't it? I mean, he still has the book of why he was going to fail our program, and he came back. If you ask me for that, you are asking me not to be a Republican, to act in justice and to take care of justice. I am the executive power. The economic revolution is not done more than start, and that's why its results are still no eventual. It is never necessary to defend it. Although the apparatus of traditional politics has not been dismantled, we know that they are desperate. Even many former leaders, anti-Kirchnerists, have begun to whitewash that they are all the same, forming a kind of parasitic anti-millennium league, a true anti-democratic union against our economic program, constantly looking for excuses to get rid of their zeal for coups. They are desperate because we no longer speak from the conviction, simply as we anticipated. That conviction was transformed into results that ratify the course, and hope for a future that will be a little better every day than the past. The data are on our side and indicate that day by day, Argentinians live a little better. That is the worst thing that can happen to Kirchnerists, is that minute by minute, their chances of returning to power disappear. They know that the project of nation that we are building implies a good future for all Argentinians, a future that comes to replace the short-time life that proposes than inflationary misery. Every reform we do is a nail to the Kirchnerists' fraud. Each pass of the chainsaw takes them away from the heat of power. They have become addicts. That is why they will not do anything to stop, because there's no one more dangerous than someone desperate. We have already demonstrated what we are capable of doing at a national level, to the point that the world has taken us as an example to follow. Now we are going to deepen the work. We are going through the province of Buenos Aires. We are going to take the city of freedom to the last corner of Argentina, because the only way to transform the country forever is by destroying the model of the caste and embracing freedom in all the provinces. I think I have been clear. The enemy has been identified. The terms of the battle have been defined, and we are aware of what is at stake. In this election, it is at stake that for the first time in a year, the people of Buenos Aires see a glimmer of hope in what until recently was a lost cause. It is at stake that the province continues the spiral of decline in which it is a product of the caste model, or that finally, a 180-degree change, as it was done in the national government. As I have said on another occasion, we serve a cause much bigger than ourselves, the one we share with the great men of our country who preceded us, giants, on whose shoulders we are standing, and to whom we must honor, together with the millions of Argentines who have put their trust in us. I ask you to take back the epic, and the strength and the courage, and the way of greatness that the 37th generation left us, that Juan Bautista already left us. Equus Maiter Avalenda, Sarmiento, Maita, Roca, Pellegrini, those men who made Argentina the richest country in the world, and they did it embracing the ideas of freedom. It will not be an easy task, but in the end, the truth always triumphs over the lie. Reality ends up being imposed against the regulatory delusions of politicians. Good, sooner or later, prevails against evil. And in the same line, organized good prevails. Whoever organized evil, I ask you to face with honor and seriousness this great challenge that we have ahead, that we have been called to be instruments of the will of a people afflicted and beaten, that we do not seek our own brands, but serve the sovereign Argentine people. In short, may God bless the Argentines. May God bless the benevolences. May the forces of heaven be with us. And long life freedom, damn it. Long life freedom, damn it. Long life freedom, damn it.